Alright, so we're dealing with a rectangle in this problem. So I like to draw to start with. And we know we're dealing with some sides, so let's give those sides some labels. So let's call this one W for width, and let's call the one going up and down H for height. Great, so now let's move on to the information that we're given. So one side is 60 centimeters longer than 10 times another side. This is actually some algebra disguised as English, so we have to do some translation. That is actually equals longer. That means we have to add. And times. Times means we have to multiply. So let's translate from English to algebra. So one side, let's just use W. One side is equals 60 centimeters longer, so that means we have to add 60. 10 times, so we're going to multiply 10 times another side. Another side is H, so 10 times H. So, from the information number 1, this is our equation number 1. That's great, but we don't know what W or H is yet. So how are we going to figure that out? If we have two unknowns, we need two equations. So that is where we're going to use the second piece of information they give us, which is that the area of the rectangle is 720 centimeters squared. That's great. We're only dealing with centimeters and centimeters squared, so we can sort of ignore that for now. And this one requires less translation. They're just telling us area, or A, is equals, again, 720 centimeters squared. Now, what do we know about the area of any rectangle? If we know the width and we know the height of any rectangle, including our rectangle, we know that the area of that rectangle is going to be the width times the height. So that's great for us because now what we can say is area, which is width times height, is just the number they gave us, 720. Great, so that is our equation number 2 from information number 2. That doesn't solve our problem quite yet, right? Because we still have W and H. We don't know what either of those are, but now we have two equations. And what is W? Let's look back at our first equation. W is actually this thing, right? It's this 60 plus 10H. So what we can do is we can, in this place, in the place of W, we can put that thing from equation number 1, 60 plus 10H, in the place of W. We are plugging in 60 plus 10H for W. Then we put in the rest of the equation, so we need to keep our H here, so that W, 60 plus 10H, times H equals 720. So let's actually keep that as our equation number 2. Great. So now all we have, excuse me, I forgot to put this in green. We just have H in this equation, right? So now we can just use algebra and solve for this. Let me do that here. I'm just going to use one color now. So our equation was 60 plus 10H times H equals 720. So first let's distribute our H out. 60 times H is just 60H. 10H times H is 10H squared. And the other side is just 720. Now let's subtract 720 from both sides. And I'm going to rearrange the left side. I'm instead just going to write it as 10H squared plus 60H. And then we have minus 720. On the right side, we're just crossing out because 720 minus 720 is just 0. This is a quadratic equation, but it's a little complicated because of this 10, right? What if we divided each of these terms by 10, and we just kept the 10 on the outside of some parentheses? Let's do that. So 10h squared divided by 10 is just h squared. 60h divided by 10 is just 6h, because we're just dividing this. And 720, we have a minus, so 720 divided by 10 is just 72. And that whole thing has to equal 0. Okay. So now we basically have to find out what values of h make this part equal 0. So we'll keep the 10 here for now. And we solve this as we would any quadratic equation. We have a plus and a minus, which means that we have an h plus on one parentheses and an h minus in the other, and that equals 0. So now, how do we solve this? What two numbers multiply together to be negative 72, but then add together to be 6? So that is actually going to be plus 12 and minus 6. So from this, our 10, it doesn't matter. If any one of these, if either one of these is equal to 0, this whole thing is going to be equal to 0. So what do we plug in? So h plus 12 equals 0. That must mean, if we subtract 12 from both sides, h is minus 12. Now, can a height, remember this is actually the height of our rectangle. Can a height ever be negative? No. So it must be this. H minus 6 equals 0. H equals, we add 6 to both sides. H equals 6. All right, so that is our answer for one of the sides. Now let's go back to equation number 2, maybe our original equation, because that's a little easier. WH equals 720. H, we just solved, is 6. W times 6 is 720. Let's divide both sides by 6, and that is W equals 120. Let's go back and check just for sanity. So if we have 120, that was our W, equals 60 plus 10 times our H was 6, that ends up being 60 plus 60, which is in fact 120.